Thank you for the privilege of participating in this exceptional event alongside such esteemed speakers. I regret that I am unable to join in person. So in this paper, I will examine a segment of the theological and cultural evolution of Western Christianity in its divergence from the Orthodox tradition and the implications for ecclesiology and technological development. I argue that modern transhumanism has roots in a uniquely Western synthesis of theological, philosophical, and technological developments, what I term the technotheurgic impulse, the pursuit of self-deification through technical means. In contrast, Orthodox Christianity retains a spiritual anthropology fundamentally at odds with these developments. In the early Latin tradition, corpus mysticum was an expression used to refer to the Eucharistic mystery of the body and blood of Christ. Building on precedents from Frankish theologians of the 9th century, a shift occurred in the West whereby the body of Christ, present in the Eucharistic mystery, gradually became distinguished from the Church, also considered as the body of Christ. This development led to a separation of the Church from the liturgical mysteries. Consequently, corpus mysticum came to signify the Church as having an existence independent of the Eucharist and later acquired a juridical connotation.
Sorry to interrupt you, Professor, my colleague.
Yes.
Do you change the slides? Because we only see the first slides of your presentation.
Yes, I will. This for now, it's a simple presentation. So.
All right, okay. I was worried that we have some technical problems.
You.
All right, thank you. Go on.
Thank you. Academic scholarship has overlooked the fact that a specific locus for the development of these notions was the exegesis and commentary on the prayer of the Latin Mass, which, according to Saint Nicholas Cavassilas, corresponded to the traditional epiclesis. In the post-schism Latin liturgics, the words of institution are considered the moment of transubstantiation, when the Eucharistic elements become the body and blood of Christ. However, St. Nicholas Cavassilas argued that the Latin canon did not rely solely on the words of institution for the consecration, but retained an implicit epiclesis. St. Nicholas addresses this point in his commentary on the Divine Liturgy, and he says, certain Latins attack us thus. They claim that after the words of the Lord, take, eat, and what follows, there is no need of any further prayer to consecrate the offerings, since they are already consecrated by the Lord's word. They maintain that to pronounce these words of Christ and then to speak of bread and wine and to pray for their consecration as if they had not already been consecrated is not only impious, but futile and unnecessary. And in response to this criticism, St. Nicholas notes the contradiction within the Latin Mass. That which silences our adversaries decisively is the fact that the Latin Church herself, to whom they refer themselves, does not cease to pray for the offerings after the words of consecration have been pronounced. This point has escaped them, no doubt, because the Latins do not recite this prayer immediately after pronouncing Christ's words, and because they do not ask explicitly for consecration and transformation of the elements into the body of the Lord, but use other terms which, however, have exactly the same meaning. This is their prayer. Command that these offerings be carried in the hands of thy holy angel to thine altar on high. And the full text of this prayer is displayed on the screen. William of Auxerre, among the earliest Latin theologians to apply the expression corpus mysticum to the Church, interpreted this prayer in his commentary. The pronoun these things, designates the signifying forms, but in order to imply that they ultimately symbolize the mystical body of Christ. Command to transport, therefore, means command to transport your mystical body, the mystical Church, by the hand of the angels to the altar on high, to the triumphant Church in heaven, that is, join the Church militant to the Church triumphant. End of quote. In the 20th century, two of the most prominent Roman Catholic liturgists Adrian Fortescue and Joseph Andreas Jungmann, identified this prayer as a vestige of a pre-schism Roman epiclesis. However, they encountered difficulties reconciling this interpretation with its placement within the order of the canon. Ultimately, the most significant interpretation, with enduring implications for Latin ecclesiology, was one that distinguished between the Eucharistic body and the spiritual or mystical body of the Church. This distinction facilitated a shift whereby the spiritual qualities of the Church were later transposed onto its juridical and corporate structure, framing the Church as a human institution with a distinct identity. The separation of the Church as an institutional, juridical, and corporate reality from the Eucharist, redefining the Church as a non-Eucharistic and or extra-Eucharistic entity, paved the way for the specifically papal conception of the Church. Within this framework, the Church, understood as a human institution, is governed by the Pope, who embodies the Church's sovereign legal personality. According to papal ecclesiology, the Pope, as the holder of the Patrine office, exercises absolute jurisdictional authority directly commissioned by God. This authority is distinct from the charismatic powers shared equally by all bishops. In this view, the Pope represents God on earth and is conceived as the monarchical principle of the Church, the earthly analog of the divine monarchy in heaven. Thomas Aquinas, in particular, contributed to the development of these notions with the two following developments. First, he frequently used the term corpus ecclesiae mysticum, the mystical body of the Church, in the place of the prior mystical body of Christ. And second, he equated and gradually replaced the notion of corpus mysticum with the notion of persona mystica, based on the Roman legal notion of fictitious person, persona ficta. This transposition effaced the last liturgical and sacramental traces in the new juristic conception of the Church. The equation between corpus and persona, body and person, had clear Nestorian tones. Since Christology underlies ecclesiology, it is symptomatic that in the West, the Church, initially conceived as the body of Christ, came to be understood as a legal person. This humanization of the Church implies a dualistic ecclesiology, which then leads to the idea that the Church, conceived as a juristic corporation, is headed not by the God-man Christ, but by the man Pope. The strategy inherent in the identification of the corporation with its legal personality consists precisely in identifying the whole of the body with the head, that is to say, with the ruler or sovereign. This identification would be explicitly made by the so-called hierocratic or papalist jurists of the 13th and 14th centuries. So, for instance, Alvarus Pelagius, in defense of the Avignon papacy, declared, "The Church, which is the mystical body of Christ and the community of Catholics, is not defined by the walls of Rome. The mystical body of Christ is where the head is, that is, the Pope." Under Augustinus Triumphus, the concept of the Pope as the personification of the Church reached its metaphysical climax. He asserted that God acts on earth solely through the Pope, making the Pope the exclusive intermediary between humanity and God. Every official act within the Church is carried out as if by the Pope himself, who is likened to the soul animating the body. Obedience to the Pope becomes indispensable for salvation, while disobedience is equated with heresy. Thus, the institutional and juridical unity embodied in the Pope emerges as the foundational ecclesiological principle of the Western tradition. And I quote, "Only the Pope is said to be the vicar of God, because only what is bound or loosed by him is considered loosed and bound by God himself. Therefore, the sentence of the Pope and the sentence of God is one sentence. There is one council of the Pope himself and of God, one sentence and one court of God and the Pope." End of quote. Some insightful commentators have observed that these ecclesiological innovations in papalism reflect a revival of the ancient pagan ruler cult. However, it is crucial to emphasize the indirect metaphysical manner in which this revival takes shape. The Pope is not worshipped directly, but as the representative of Christ on earth, he assumes attributes and functions ascribed to Christ, most notably the role of mediator between God and humanity. As a legal representative, the Pope is conceived as a manifestation of, of Christ's presence. This development stems from the dualistic conception of the Church that came to dominate in the West. The Church is redefined as a human institution, yet, paradoxically, this human institution becomes the sole embodiment of God on earth. In this way, we witness a return to pagan-like ideas, but transformed within a distinctly post-Christian framework. And as Saint Justin Popovich declared with the utmost clarity, in Western Europe, Christianity has gradually transformed into humanism. With time and with effort, the God-man has been shrunk and finally reduced to man, to an infallible man in Rome. Thus, there developed a Western Christian humanistic maximalism, papism, which takes everything away from Christ. When Christianity, with all its infinite divine human truths, was reduced to man, Western Christianity was transformed into humanism. For in its essence, Western Christianity is the most decisive humanism, because it has proclaimed man to be infallible and has transformed divine human religion into a humanistic one. This is shown by the fact that the God-man has been pushed out into heaven, and in his vacated place on earth, there has been appointed his vicar and representative. What tragic illogic to appoint a vicar and representative for the omnipresent God and Lord. Western Christianity
5 minutes to the end of your presentation.
Yes.
All right.
Western Christianity's theological shifts also fueled its embrace of technological development. Historians like Ernst Benz and Lynn White have debated the unique contributions of Western Christian beliefs to the rise of technology. Benz identified the Christian conception of God as creator, humanity's dominion over creation, and the incarnation's sanctification of matter as foundational to Europe's technological innovations. In his critique of Benz, White contended that this hypothesis overlooked a critical distinction, and I quote, "The Greek Church held the fundamentals of the Christian faith. Yet, after Callinicos' invention of Greek fire just before 673, the highly civilized regions dominated by Eastern Orthodoxy were unadventurous in technology. If, as Benz believes, the vigor of Western medieval technology is an expression of religion, the sources of that dynamism must be found less in the broader aspects of Christianity than in the distinctive qualities and moods that differentiate Occidental from Byzantine Christian piety." End of quote. According to White, this difference was evident in the iconographic depictions of the creator God, noting that Western iconography began to depict God as a master craftsman, holding tools like compasses and scales, a symbol of engineering and mastery over creation. This imagery contrasts sharply with the Orthodox depiction of creation as a dynamic and blessed reality. And these are Orthodox icons, of course.
Professor, can you hear me?
Yes.
Just to remind you, we are moving fast to the end of this session. You still have 1 minute and a half.
Yes, yes.
All right.
So the medieval reevaluation of technology can be traced back to Eriugena, who elevated the mechanical arts to the same status as the classical seven liberal arts. He invested technology with spiritual significance as an element of man's divine image. And now the emphasis was on man's paradisiacal dominion over creation, which could be potentially reinstated through technology. These distinct currents contributed to the creation of a cultural climate which coalesced into the Renaissance and its adoption of Neoplatonism, Hermeticism, and Jewish Kabbalah. The Renaissance synthesis of papal ecclesiology, esotericism, and technical knowledge gave rise to what I call a technotheurgic impulse, a set of practices aimed at the self-deification of man through technical means. Through this impulse, technological mastery becomes framed as a spiritual pursuit. While publicly disavowing such ambitions, the Renaissance Church of Rome cultivated these ideas in secret, blending them with papal humanism. And this impulse, I argue, constitutes the groundwork for modern transhumanism. By positioning technology as a means of apotheosis, transhumanism prolongs the theological and cultural legacy of Western modernity. Its roots lie in the loss of the God-manhood central to Orthodox Christianity, supplanted in the West by a vision of humanity as both the creator and the object of salvation. And just 30 seconds. 30 seconds. The transhumanist project epitomizes the anthropocentric trajectory of Western theology and culture. Its rise is inseparable from the theological innovations that reshaped the Western Church into a human institution governed by juridical principles and aligned with the aspirations of technological mastery. In contrast, Orthodox Christianity maintains a spiritual anthropology grounded in the God-man Christ and in the Eucharistic foundation of the Church. The solution to the transhumanist dilemma lies in rediscovering what was forsaken in this process: the faith of Orthodox Christianity and the path to deification, not through human effort or technical means, but through authentic participation in the divine life of Christ. Thank you very much.